I'm 48 years old and I was adopted from birth. And I help coach a travel basketball team in my area. Now, the team is made up of fifth graders. So they're 10 and 11 years old. And our last game we lost. And the kids were upset, which I like to see because that means you care, right? If you didn't care, you wouldn't get upset. But one thing that we dealt with as coaches was the kids being upset about the referees. Now, I sit at the end of the bench, so when the kids come off, I try to help them adjust to how the game's being played, or, you know, some pointers on, whether defense or offense, where they're supposed to be, what they're supposed to do, boxing out, all those different things. So this week, a bunch of the kids were complaining about the referees, and I've said it before, but I and all of us as coaches have said it before, is that you can't complain about the refs. You just have to adjust to how the refs are calling the game. And if you look at the game, were the refs making some bad calls? Yes. Were they missing some calls? Yes. And was this reffing crew a little different than our last game? Yes. The thing is, I try to teach the kids is every game's going to be slightly different, and you have to be able to adjust to how the referee is calling the game, and you have to be able to adjust your game. Some refs allow you to do hand checking. Some refs don't. Some refs allow the game to be a little more physical. Some refs don't. That's just basketball. And you might wonder, like, what does this have to do with being adopted? So me teaching the kids about adjusting to how the game of basketball is played is something that I had to do in life of being an adopted child. That just like basketball, sometimes it's not fair. Sometimes you wish things were slightly different, but the reality is they're not. And in basketball, you have your idea of how the game's supposed to be called. You have your idea of how the ref is calling the game. And if those two things don't meet up right, then there's a clash, right? He should have called that. He didn't. That's a travel. He didn't call it. That was a charge. He didn't call it. And so the same thing in life. This is the idea you have, and this is what life gives you. And when your idea does not meet with reality, there's a clash. So I never thought I should have been adopted, but I was adopted. And in my mind, there was a clash. I was thrown away. That's how I felt. I shouldn't have been thrown away. I was angry at how things were going, but my reality is that's how they were. And so I hope my kids get this earlier than I did, because I didn't start to adjust to this until I got into probably my 20s, my late teens, early 20s. And life is not always fair. Life doesn't always go how you think it should have went and how you think things should work out. And it's not until you are able to adjust and able to change you and your perspective on things, that's how you change your life. And so as an adopted child and feeling thrown away for years and being upset about it, and why would my biological parents give me up, and woe is me, and this is just unfair. It's like complaining about the refs at a game. It's not doing anything but making me upset. And so I had to learn to change how I frame things. This is something that I think I mentioned in a previous video this saying that came to my head: the deeper the root, the greater the tree. And it was just a thought I had years ago. And so imagine yourself as an apple seed, right? And somebody walks out into their backyard, they take a shovel, and they dig a hole. They throw you in the hole, and they bury you underground. Now you're a seed that's underground. It's dark, it's lonely. You're like, why would somebody bury me underground? Like, why would you put me here? Like, this sucks. Like, it's uncomfortable, it's new. You're used to sunlight, and now you're underground and there is no light. And you can be angry about it and mad about it and want somebody to help you out and want somebody to get the shovel and get you out of there. Or you can be an apple seed and somebody can take you out back and they could dig a hole. They could put you in the hole and they can plant you. Now that perspective and how it's framed changes everything, because we all know that inside of an apple seed is an apple tree. And in order to get the tree out of the seed, you have to plant it. And so what happens if now the seed is planted, and now the seed's perspective is, yeah, it's dark right now, but it won't always be dark. And while you're planted underground, you're going through these changes and you're excited about what's coming. And we all know in order for an apple tree to grow, it's got to grow down before it comes up. And so the deeper the roots grow, the greater the tree will be. And so what I had to do for me to better my life was to change the framing around my life. I could sit here right now angry that I feel like my parents threw me away when I was an infant, when I was helpless. That could be my perspective and how I view it. And I could clash with life my whole life, angry, mad, because I think things should have went one way and they didn't. And every time something happens, now I'm mad. Or I could frame it as my parents cared enough about me to not abort me, to go through the process of putting a child up for adoption, for my adopted parents going through the process to adopt me, finally adopting me, and giving me a loving home. And for years, I looked at it from a negative perspective, and I wasn't the kid that lashed out. You know, sometimes kids are angry and they lash out and they might get in trouble in school. I was the complete opposite of that. I didn't get in trouble in school. I didn't lash out. I was quiet. And sometimes I was talking with somebody this week, and we don't always recognize that the quiet person is going through something too. We tend to think that the person that's the loudest is hurting the most. I was completely quiet about it, and I was hurting. I put one of my first videos, I don't know which one, and one of my best friends said, "Dude, I didn't know you were going through that." I was like, "Yeah, I just didn't talk about it." And so I didn't mention it. I didn't say anything to anybody, but I was hurting. So you never know what's going on with somebody around you. Even though they're quiet, that doesn't mean they're okay. So check on your friends. But framing how you see yourself and how you see life is important, regardless of the situation that happens. And just like in a basketball game, there are some calls that are terrible and that were unfair. Same as life. Sometimes things are unfair. Sometimes you wish that things didn't happen for certain people. You wish things didn't happen for yourself. But how you frame that matters, because you frame it in a particular way and you make decisions from that framing, and you have to live in those decisions. What you decided yesterday, you got to live in today. What you decided last year, you got to live in tomorrow. So yes, you get to control how your life turns out. Even though maybe sometimes you didn't get to control how it started, you get to control how it finishes. And that's all a matter of framing it. I uh, I looked at myself coming up, and I was angry because I'm here. I felt here alone, and I'll explain what I mean by I was here alone. So my biological family wasn't there. My sisters who are adopted, they're both biological sisters. So in my mind, they had each other. And then my father, he had his siblings and his mom and his dad and his, his family. My mother had her siblings and her mom and dad, and so she had her family. And I felt alone. And it wasn't until I started to feed myself some positive stuff and started to look at things differently that I recognized that I had something that none of them had. I literally had a biological set of parents that loved me and adopted pair of parents that loved me that joined together at my birth to give me a chance at a better life. And now that I recognize that, I'm sitting here talking to you. And those that know me really well know that this is who I am. Like I'm just an encourager by nature. And the fact that I can take something that happened to me and encourage you is awesome for me because that's who I am. And sometimes in life, it gets difficult, and there's always another side to that difficulty. Like I started writing some children's books, and I'm writing them from the perspective of being adopted or being in the foster care system. And I've shared them with a few of my friends, and man, they're like, wow, this is really cool. This is really good. And because I feel like a kind of a bridge, right? That I could sit down with a set of parents who are have adopted or are adopting a child, and I could be a bridge to help you recognize kind of what that kid is thinking as they're going through this process. And I said, man, I wish I could do that for everybody, but I can't. I can't be everywhere all at once, right? And so I was like, well, how can I do that more? Well, what if I started writing some stuff, and I could create conversations between a set of parents and kids so that a 10 or 11-year-old can talk to mom and dad about how they're feeling, and the parents can talk to the kid about what's going on with them and create that conversation. Because like I mentioned before, I wish I would have had certain conversations with my parents. And I don't know if my mom or my dad recognized what I was going through. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. It just was never spoken. And I wish it was spoken. And maybe they wish it was spoken. I don't know. Like I said before, they're deceased. So I can't have that conversation. But I know as a young kid, I wish I would have had that conversation. So I said, how can I help with that? So I started writing some stuff. And eventually, I'll get it all together. But all of that comes from me being adopted from birth and me feeling how I felt and working through those feelings up to the point where I'm talking to you. And I'm really excited about publishing. There's multiple books that I have, but publishing them because I know it'll help somebody. I know it'll help a 10-year-old me, 11-year-old me, who's sitting there, who's got these feelings going on and doesn't know what to do with them. I know reading that between parents, I know it will help them. And I hope it helps them frame their life in a better perspective sooner than I did. And I don't regret how long it took because it needed to take that long for me to be here talking to you, to write down what I wrote. So I'm good with it. But I'm looking forward to helping people who are in similar situations that I was in, even adults. Like I've heard from some adults that have been adopted or went through foster care, and I've had conversations with. And yeah, man, it can be a difficult thing to work through in your head, but framing it correctly can make all the difference in the world. Because like I tell my fifth graders, you got to adjust to the referee.